Imagine waking up from a coma to discover everyone believes you're someone else, someone who died. That's exactly what happened to Whitney Cerak, a survivor of a horrific crash that blurred the lines between life, death, and identity itself. Whitney Cerak was on the cusp of a new chapter. At 18, she was the embodiment of youthful energy and optimism. Her blonde hair, often mistaken for someone else's, framed a face that radiated joy, and her eyes, a bright, clear blue, held the promise of a future she was eager to embrace. College was just around the corner, a tantalizing prospect filled with independence, new experiences, and the pursuit of her passions. Growing up in a close-knit family of four, Whitney cherished the bonds she shared with her parents and siblings. They were her anchors, her constant source of support and love. But beyond the warmth of her family, Whitney found a kindred spirit in Laura Van Ryn. Their friendship was a tapestry woven with shared laughter, whispered secrets, and an unspoken understanding that transcended mere words. They were, in many ways, two sides of the same coin, their similarities extending beyond their matching blonde hair and cheerful dispositions. People often mix them up, a testament to their physical resemblance, which only added another layer of amusement to their already vibrant connection. Whitney's heart beat for sports, particularly volleyball. The thrill of the game, the camaraderie of the team, the challenge of pushing her physical limits. It was all a source of exhilaration and fulfillment. The upcoming college field trip felt like a perfect blend of her love for adventure and her eagerness to bond with her classmates, especially Laura. She envisioned a future filled with possibilities, a degree in physical education, a career shaping young minds and bodies, perhaps even coaching a volleyball team of her own. The trip was a small step towards that grand vision, a chance to unwind and celebrate before the responsibilities of college life took hold. There was a slight flutter of anxiety in her chest, the natural apprehension that accompanies any significant transition, but it was overwhelmingly overshadowed by excitement. She packed her bag carefully, a mix of practical necessities and small tokens of comfort. A favorite book, a picture of her family, a small, worn volleyball charm she always carried for luck. Laura Van Ryn, while sharing Whitney's sunny disposition and physical likeness, possessed a quiet strength that set her apart. She was the introspective one, the observer, the friend who listened more than she spoke, but whose words carried weight and wisdom. Her interests leaned towards art and literature, finding solace in the beauty of a well-crafted painting or the depth of a compelling novel. Laura's family dynamic was slightly different from Whitney's. She had a younger brother, a mischievous and energetic boy named Ethan, with whom she shared a unique bond, a mixture of playful teasing and fierce protectiveness. While she loved her parents deeply, there were occasional clashes, small disagreements that stemmed from her yearning for independence and their natural desire to keep her close. Beneath her calm exterior, Laura harbored quiet anxieties. The thought of leaving home, of stepping away from the familiar comfort of her family, stirred a sense of unease within her. She worried about navigating the challenges of college life, about finding her place in a new and unfamiliar environment. There was a particular boy, too, a friend from her high school art class, with whom she shared a connection that felt both exciting and uncertain. She hadn't quite figured out what it meant, but the thought of leaving him behind added a layer of melancholy to her anticipation of the trip. Yet, like Whitney, she felt the pull toward the future. The preparations for the field trip were a flurry of activity. Whitney and Laura texted back and forth, coordinating outfits, sharing playlists, and making plans for what they would do together. The air crackled with anticipation, a shared sense of adventure that bound them even closer. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future, their voices filled with the boundless optimism of youth. The bus ride itself was a microcosm of their college experience to come. Laughter filled the air, punctuated by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the chatter of excited voices. Students swapped stories, sang along to popular songs, and played silly games to pass the time. Whitney and Laura sat together, of course, their shoulders bumping as they leaned in to share jokes and observations. There was a fleeting moment, a whisper of unease that brushed against Whitney's consciousness. She had a strange dream the night before, a jumbled sequence of images that left her feeling vaguely unsettled. She dismissed it as pre-trip jitters, but a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She glanced at Laura, who was gazing out the window, a small smile playing on her lips. Whitney decided to keep her anxieties to herself, not wanting to dampen the mood. The sun began to set. The highway stretched before them, a ribbon of asphalt unwinding into the gathering dusk. Whitney leaned her head back against the seat, feeling a wave of contentment wash over her. She closed her eyes, imagining the fun they would have, the memories they would make. She could hear Laura humming softly beside her, a familiar melody that filled her with a sense of peace. The bus was quieter now, the initial burst of energy having subsided into a comfortable hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. A flash of headlights, a screech of tires, a deafening crash. The world exploded into a cacophony of noise and chaos. Metal screamed against metal, glass shattered into a million glittering shards, and the air filled with the terrified screams of students. Whitney's body was thrown violently against the seat in front of her, a searing pain shooting through her arm. For a split second, she saw Laura's face, frozen in a mask of terror, before everything went black. The impact was devastating. The van, struck by a vehicle that had veered out of control, was hurled across the highway, its frame twisted and mangled beyond recognition. Bodies were flung like rag dolls, some landing on the shattered remnants of the seats, others thrown onto the unforgiving asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline, burning rubber, and blood. The silence that followed the initial crash was even more terrifying than the noise. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the moans of the injured and the frantic cries of those who were able to move. Students stumbled out of the wreckage, their faces streaked with blood and tears, desperately searching for their friends and classmates. The scene was one of utter devastation, a horrifying tableau of twisted metal and broken bodies. 5 lives were extinguished in an instant, their futures abruptly cut short. Among them, tragically, was Laura Van Ryn. The news spread like wildfire among the survivors, a wave of grief and disbelief washing over them. Whitney teetered on the brink of death. Unconscious but miraculously alive, she was rushed to the nearest hospital, her body a mass of broken bones and internal injuries. Doctors and nurses worked frantically to stabilize her, their faces grim with determination. The emergency room was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic ballet of life and death. The identification process was hampered by the sheer scale of the tragedy and the severity of the injuries. In the confusion and rush to save lives, a crucial mistake was made. Whitney, bearing a striking resemblance to Laura, and with her identifying documents lost or destroyed in the crash, was misidentified as her deceased friend. The extent of her facial injuries, coupled with the swelling and bruising, made visual confirmation unreliable. Whitney's parents, Don and Colleen Cerak, received the devastating news that their daughter, Laura, was in critical condition. They rushed to the hospital, their hearts pounding with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. They arrived to find a young woman lying in a hospital bed, her face obscured by bandages and medical equipment, clinging to life by a thread. They were told she was in a coma, her prognosis uncertain. The Ceraks, believing this was Laura, began their vigil. They sat by her bedside, holding her hand, talking to her, praying for her recovery. They shared stories about Laura, about her life, her dreams, her quirky sense of humor. They broke the news to Laura about the accident, about the loss of her dear friend, Whitney. They described Whitney's funeral, the outpouring of grief, the beautiful tributes that were paid to her memory. They spoke of their own grief, their struggle to come to terms with the loss of their beloved daughter. Days turned into weeks, and Whitney remained in a coma. Doctors were unsure if she would ever wake up, and even if she did, They warned of the possibility of permanent brain damage. But the Ceraks, still believing this was their daughter's friend, never gave up hope. They continued their vigil, their love and faith unwavering. Meanwhile, the Van Ryn family was grieving the loss of their daughter, holding a funeral and clinging to each other in their shared sorrow. They, too, sent their well wishes to the girl they believed to be Laura, lying comatose in the hospital. The two families, bound together by tragedy, were unknowingly living a lie, a heartbreaking deception born of chaos and mistaken identity. After weeks in the silent darkness of a coma, Whitney's eyes flickered open. The world swam in a focus slowly, a blurry kaleidoscope of shapes and colors. She felt a dull, throbbing pain throughout her body, a constant reminder of the trauma she had endured. The room was sterile and unfamiliar, filled with the beeping of machines and the hushed whispers of unseen people. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry and scratchy, her voice a mere croak. Disorientation washed over her in waves. Where is she? What had happened? Why did everything feel so wrong? The faces that gradually came into focus were kind and concerned, but they were also unfamiliar. They called her Laura, a name that echoed strangely in her ears, a name that didn't belong to her. A wave of panic began to rise within her. She struggled to remember, to piece together the fragments of her shattered memory. The last thing she recalled was the bus ride, the laughter, the feeling of Laura sitting beside her, and then nothing. A vast, empty void. When she finally managed to form words, they were barely audible, a whisper that sent shockwaves through the room. "I'm Whitney." The reaction was immediate and profound. The doctors and nurses exchanged bewildered glances, their faces etched with confusion and disbelief. Don and Colleen Cerak, who had been maintaining their constant vigil, stared at her with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. They had been calling her Laura, pouring out their grief for their deceased daughter, Whitney, to this young woman who was now claiming to be their daughter. The room buzzed with a flurry of activity. Doctors rushed to examine Whitney, their minds racing to make sense of this impossible situation. They began to ask her questions, gentle but probing, designed to test her memory and confirm her identity. "What's your name?" "Whitney Cerak." "What's your date of birth?" She answered correctly. "Who are your parents?" "Don and Colleen Cerak." With each correct answer, the Ceraks' hope grew stronger, while the reality of the situation became increasingly surreal. But the doctors needed more concrete proof. They delved deeper, asking questions about specific memories, inside jokes, details that only the real Whitney would know. Then came the pivotal moment. One of the nurses, while examining Whitney, noticed a small detail that had been overlooked in the initial chaos: a belly button piercing. The Ceraks had no memory of Laura having a piercing. They remembered Whitney had one, a small, almost insignificant detail, but it was the key that unlocked the truth. They asked Whitney about her friends, about Laura. She spoke of Laura with a fondness and grief that were undeniably genuine. She recounted shared memories, inside jokes, details that only the two of them would know. She even, heartbreakingly, remembered being told about her own funeral, the details relayed to her by the people she now knew were not Laura's parents, but her own. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a picture that was both miraculous and devastating. The truth, when it finally emerged, was a tidal wave of emotion. For the Ceraks, it was a mixture of overwhelming joy and profound grief. Joy that their daughter, Whitney, was alive, a miracle they had dared not hope for. Grief that Laura Van Ryn, the young woman they had come to love as their own during those agonizing weeks, was truly gone. The emotional whiplash was intense, a roller coaster of elation and sorrow. For the Van Ryns, the news was a fresh wound, a reopening of the grief they had been trying to process. The daughter they had mourned was undeniably gone, but the girl they had believed to be in a coma, the girl they had sent their prayers and well wishes to, was a stranger, a survivor who had unknowingly carried the burden of their grief. Yet, amidst the renewed pain, there was a flicker of solace, a sense of relief that Whitney, a young woman who had shared such a close bond with their daughter, had been spared. For Whitney, the realization was a profound shock. She had to grapple with the fact that she had survived while her dear friend had perished. She had to come to terms with the fact that she had been living under a false identity, that she had been mourned by her own family, that she had even been told details about her own funeral. The weight of survivor's guilt, coupled with the lingering trauma of the accident, was a heavy burden to bear. She had to learn to be Whitney again, in a world that had already grieved her loss. She remembered conversations the Ceraks had with her, believing she was Laura, detailing the funeral service. It was overwhelming. Whitney's recovery was a long and arduous journey, both physically and emotionally. The physical wounds, while severe, were the more straightforward challenge. She underwent multiple surgeries, endured countless hours of physical therapy, and pushed her body to its limits to regain her strength and mobility. The pain was often intense, but her determination, fueled by the knowledge that she had been given a second chance at life, never wavered. The emotional scars, however, ran much deeper. The trauma of the accident, the survivor's guilt, the confusion of the mistaken identity, and the grief for Laura's death. It was a heavy burden for anyone to bear, especially a young woman just starting her adult life. She sought the help of therapists, who provided her with a safe space to process her emotions, to confront her fears, and to develop coping mechanisms for dealing with the lingering trauma. The support of her family and friends was invaluable. The Ceraks, now reunited with their true daughter, showered her with love and understanding. They were patient, compassionate, and unwavering in their commitment to helping her heal. Her friends rallied around her, offering their support and companionship, helping her to rediscover the joys of life and to find a sense of normalcy amidst the extraordinary circumstances. One of the most difficult steps in Whitney's healing process was confronting the past. She knew she needed to visit Laura's grave, to say goodbye properly, to express the grief and guilt that had been bottled up inside her. The visit to the cemetery was intensely emotional. Standing before Laura's headstone, Whitney felt a wave of sorrow wash over her. She spoke to Laura, her voice choked with tears, apologizing for not being able to save her, expressing her gratitude for their friendship, and promising to live her life to the fullest in honor of Laura's memory. The meeting with the Van Ryn family was equally poignant. The two families, bound together by a tragedy that had intertwined their lives in the most unexpected way, came together in a spirit of shared grief and mutual support. There were tears, embraces, and heartfelt conversations. The Van Ryns, while still grieving the loss of their daughter, expressed their gratitude that Whitney had survived, that a part of Laura's spirit lived on in her friend. They offered Whitney their forgiveness and their understanding, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances that had led to the mistaken identity. The Ceraks, in turn, expressed their deepest condolences to the Van Ryns, acknowledging the pain they had endured and the grace with which they had handled the unimaginable situation. The idea of writing a book, of sharing their story with the world, emerged organically from these conversations. It was a way to honor Laura's memory, to process their collective grief, and to offer hope and inspiration to others who had experienced loss and trauma. The writing process itself was therapeutic, a way for Whitney, the Ceraks, and the Van Ryns to make sense of the tragedy, to find meaning in the midst of suffering, and to heal together. Returning to college was a significant challenge for Whitney. She was no longer the carefree, optimistic young woman who had set out on that fateful field trip. She was a survivor, carrying the weight of her experience, the scars of her trauma, and the memory of her lost friend. But she was also stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever to live a life worthy of the second chance she had been given. She found solace in her studies, particularly in her pursuit of physical education. She understood, in a way that few others could, the importance of physical and mental well-being, the power of the human body to heal and to overcome adversity. She found purpose in helping others, in sharing her story, and in inspiring her students to embrace life's challenges with courage and determination. Whitney eventually found love, a relationship built on trust, understanding, and a shared appreciation for the fragility of life. She built a family of her own, creating a home filled with love, laughter, and the constant reminder of the preciousness of every moment. The lessons she learned from the tragedy, from the mistaken identity, from the loss of her friend, shaped her into the person she became. She learned the importance of cherishing every day, of living in the present moment, of appreciating the simple joys of life. She learned the power of forgiveness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring strength of love and friendship. Whitney Cerak's story is a testament to the power of hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring bonds of love and friendship. It is a story of tragedy and survival, of loss and recovery, of mistaken identity and the ultimate triumph of truth. It is a story that reminds us to cherish every moment, to embrace life's challenges with courage, and to find meaning in the midst of suffering. The book, Mistaken Identity, stands as a powerful reminder of the extraordinary events that unfolded, a tribute to Laura Van Ryn, and a beacon of hope for anyone who has faced adversity. It serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, heal, and find a way to move forward, carrying the lessons of the past with grace and gratitude. The story continues, not as a tale of tragedy, but a powerful anthem of resilience, hope, and the unwavering human spirit.